In the vast expanse of the cosmos, where stars twinkled like diamonds scattered across an endless velvet canvas, there existed a realm that defied human comprehension. The planet Zaria, nestled within the Andromeda Galaxy's outer rim, shimmered with an otherworldly beauty that could make even the most seasoned space traveler weep with wonder. Its atmosphere refracted light into cascading rainbows that danced across crystalline spires and flowing rivers of liquid crystal, creating a symphony of colors that seemed to breathe with life itself. At the heart of this celestial paradise stood the Celestial Citadel, a magnificent structure that appeared to be woven from starlight and ancient wisdom. The citadel's walls pulsed gently with bioluminescent patterns, telling stories of eons passed through intricate designs that shifted and changed with each passing moment. Within these hallowed halls, where gravity seemed to bend to the will of its inhabitants, presided Princess Lyri, the sole heir to the Zarathian throne. Princess Lyri was unlike any being in the known universe. Her form was both ethereal and commanding, with skin that shimmered like moonlit water and eyes that contained galaxies within their depths. Long tendrils of opalescent hair flowed around her like living silk, responding to her emotions with subtle shifts in color and movement. Yet beneath this divine exterior beat a heart burdened by centuries of solitude and duty. For despite her royal status and the adoration of her people, Lyri carried within her a profound loneliness, a void that no amount of power or luxury could fill. The source of this emptiness lay in memories that had grown faint with time yet remained achingly vivid when she allowed herself to dwell upon them. Centuries ago, during a rare diplomatic mission to Earth, she had encountered a young human male whose courage and kindness had touched something deep within her soul. Their brief friendship had been a revelation, showing her a world beyond protocol and expectation, where laughter came freely and connections formed without calculation. But fate, as it often does, had intervened cruelly, tearing them apart before their bond could fully blossom. Now, as she moved through the grand corridors of her palace, Lyri found herself increasingly drawn to the observation deck that overlooked the prisoner quarters. It wasn't mere curiosity that compelled her feet in this direction, though that certainly played a part, but rather an unsettling premonition that had been growing stronger with each passing cycle. The latest human captive, brought in by Border Patrol after attempting to breach Zarathian space, stirred something within her that she couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was the way he carried himself with quiet dignity despite his circumstances, or how his eyes held a familiar spark of defiance mixed with compassion. As she approached the reinforced crystal barrier that separated her from the detention level, Lyri felt her hearts, yes, plural, for Zarathians were blessed with two, begin to beat in an irregular rhythm. The sensation was foreign and unwelcome, sending ripples of anxiety through her normally composed demeanor. She had seen the prisoner's image during the initial security briefing, but something about viewing him directly through the transparent barrier made her pause, her graceful movements faltering for the first time in recent memory. The human sat cross-legged on the floor of his cell, seemingly oblivious to her presence. His dark hair fell in disarray across his forehead, and though his face bore the marks of fatigue, there was an underlying strength in his posture that spoke of resilience. He wore the standard-issue detainee garments, but somehow managed to make them appear dignified rather than degrading. What struck Lyri most, however, was the way he interacted with the guard droids, treating them not with fear or hostility, but with a respectful acknowledgement that bordered on friendly. Her fingers traced the cool surface of the observation panel as memories began to stir, unbidden and unwelcome. The way he tilted his head when listening, the particular curve of his smile when amused, the gentle cadence of his voice when speaking, it all seemed so achingly familiar. Yet this couldn't be possible. The human from her past had disappeared into the void of space-time long ago, lost to the cruel whims of interstellar politics. And yet, a sudden wave of vertigo swept over her, forcing her to steady herself against the wall. Her vision blurred momentarily, and when clarity returned, she found herself staring at the prisoner with renewed intensity. The resemblance was uncanny, almost impossible, and yet undeniable. Every fiber of her being screamed that this was no mere coincidence, that fate had conspired to bring her face to face with a ghost from her past. The realization hit her with the force of a supernova, freezing her in place as surely as if she'd been encased in temporal stasis. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, the entire universe seemed to hold its collective breath along with her. The human male who had once shown her the meaning of true friendship, who had taught her to see beyond the rigid structures of royal protocol, was sitting mere meters away, unaware that his old companion now stood watching him from behind a veil of crystalline separation. Lyri's mind raced through the implications, each thought more overwhelming than the last. How could this be possible? The odds of their paths crossing again, across centuries and light years of separation, defied every law of probability. Yet here they were, reunited in the most improbable of circumstances, one as a princess of the realm, the other as a prisoner accused of trespassing in sacred space. Her legs threatened to give way beneath her, and she pressed her palms flat against the observation panel, seeking support from the cold, unyielding surface. The weight of memories crashed over her in waves, their secret meetings in Earth's twilight hours, the shared laughter that had seemed to bridge the gap between their species, the painful goodbye that had left an ache in her soul that never truly healed. All these moments, long buried beneath layers of royal responsibility and cosmic distance, surged back with devastating clarity. The prisoner looked up suddenly, as if sensing her presence, and their eyes met through the transparent barrier. Time itself seemed to fracture at that moment, the space between them dissolving into nothingness. His expression shifted from mild curiosity to something deeper, more profound, as recognition dawned in his features. The years had been kind to him, etching lines of experience and wisdom into his face while leaving intact the essence of the person she had once known. Lyrie's heart pounded in a chaotic rhythm, each beat reverberating through her entire being. She wanted to speak, to call out to him, to break through the barrier that separated them both physically and metaphorically. But words failed her, trapped somewhere between disbelief and overwhelming emotion. Instead, she stood frozen, her regal composure shattered by the force of rediscovery, while the man who had once been her closest friend, and perhaps something more, stared back at her through the crystalline divide. The air between them crackled with unspoken words and unresolved history, each heartbeat stretching the moment thinner until it seemed it might snap entirely. Lyrie's hands trembled against the observation panel, her usually impeccable control slipping away like sand through an hourglass. The prisoner's eyes widened further, recognition giving way to shock that mirrored her own. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound emerged, and the silence between them became a living entity, heavy with the weight of years and choices made in desperation. Memories flooded Lyrie's consciousness with such intensity that she swayed on her feet, the elegant grace that defined her movements abandoning her completely. She recalled their last meeting on Earth's moonlit shores, the way his human hand had felt warm against her cool skin, the promise they had made to find each other again despite the vast distances that would separate them. A promise broken not by choice but by forces beyond their control, the political machinations of two civilizations that viewed their friendship as a threat to established order. Her mind raced through the intervening centuries, each year marked by a hollow ache that no amount of power or privilege could fill. She remembered the nights spent staring at Earth's distant blue-green orb through telescopic windows, willing herself to believe that somewhere out there, he still thought of her too. The official reports had declared his vessel lost in a spatial anomaly, presumed destroyed, and she had forced herself to accept this narrative, burying her grief beneath layers of royal duty and intergalactic diplomacy. Yet now, standing mere meters away from him, she understood that everything she had believed about his fate had been a carefully constructed lie. The realization struck her with physical force, making her knees buckle slightly. Her breathing became shallow, each inhale bringing with it the scent of ionized air mingled with the faintest trace of his familiar human essence, a combination that threatened to overwhelm her completely. The prisoner's expression transformed from shock to something more complex, a mixture of joy and pain that reflected her own turmoil. He rose slowly to his feet, moving toward the barrier with careful steps that spoke of restrained emotion. His eyes never left hers, searching for answers to questions that neither of them had dared to ask aloud. The connection between them stretched taut, vibrating with the energy of unspoken truths and missed opportunities. Lyrie's dual hearts thudded erratically, their rhythm discordant as conflicting emotions warred within her. Part of her wanted to flee, to retreat to the safety of her royal chambers and pretend this moment had never happened. Another part urged her to shatter the barrier between them, consequences be damned, and reclaim the friendship that had been stolen from them. Her fingers curled against the smooth surface, leaving faint impressions of heat that quickly dissipated into the cool crystal. The prisoner reached the barrier and placed his hand against it, palm flat and fingers spread wide. His touch sent ripples through the material, distorting his features momentarily before clearing to reveal eyes brimming with unshed tears. Lyrie felt her own eyes sting with moisture, an unusual reaction for a Zarathian, whose tear ducts had evolved to remain dry except in moments of extreme emotional distress. The sight of his human vulnerability, so raw and genuine, broke through her remaining defenses. Time seemed to warp around them, seconds stretching into eternity as they stood separated by mere centimeters of advanced technology and centuries of misunderstanding. The weight of their shared history pressed down upon them, demanding acknowledgement and resolution. Yet neither moved to break the silence, each afraid that speaking would shatter the fragile connection they had just rediscovered. The air grew heavier with each passing moment, charged with the electricity of possibilities both wonderful and terrifying. Lyrie's internal conflict reached a fever pitch as she wrestled with the implications of this unexpected reunion. Protocol demanded she maintain her distance, treat him as any other prisoner who had violated Zarathian space. Yet every fiber of her being rebelled against this notion, screaming that this was no ordinary situation, no typical prisoner-guard dynamic. The man before her represented a piece of her soul that had been missing for centuries, a fragment of her identity that she had long since convinced herself was lost forever. Her position as princess carried responsibilities that extended far beyond personal desires. The delicate balance of interstellar relations, the safety of her people, the expectations of her royal lineage, all these factors weighed heavily on her shoulders. To acknowledge their past connection publicly would invite scrutiny and potentially destabilize the careful equilibrium she had worked centuries to maintain. Yet to deny it entirely felt like betraying not just him, but herself as well. The prisoner's continued presence at the barrier, his hand still pressed against the invisible wall separating them, spoke volumes about his own internal struggle. His eyes conveyed a mixture of hope and resignation, understanding and confusion. She recognized the subtle tension in his stance, the way his jaw clenched periodically as he fought to maintain composure. It was a battle she knew all too well, having waged similar wars within herself countless times throughout her long existence. A particularly sharp pang of guilt stabbed through her chest as she considered the circumstances of his capture. Had he been searching for her all this time, following leads and chasing rumors across the stars? The thought filled her with both warmth and dread, for if this were true, his devotion deserved better than imprisonment in her very own palace. Yet releasing him now, without proper explanation or procedure, could raise suspicions among her council and security forces that might prove impossible to contain. Her gaze flickered to the security cameras mounted discreetly in the corners of the observation deck. While she possessed the authority to disable them temporarily, doing so would create records that could later be scrutinized. Every action she took, every decision she made, would be analyzed and judged by those who watched her constantly, waiting for any sign of weakness or favoritism. The weight of these considerations pressed down upon her, threatening to crush the fragile hope that had blossomed in her chest. The prisoner's eyes locked onto hers with renewed intensity, and she realized with startling clarity that he understood her dilemma perfectly. His slight nod, barely perceptible but filled with meaning, communicated volumes about his willingness to wait, to play whatever role necessary to protect her position while they navigated this unprecedented situation. This display of understanding and patience only served to deepen her emotional turmoil, for it reminded her of the qualities that had drawn her to him centuries ago, the same qualities that now made maintaining professional distance nearly impossible. Her hands trembled anew as she considered the potential consequences of any course of action. To acknowledge their past openly would require explanations that could jeopardize not just her position, but possibly the entire framework of Zarathian human relations. Yet to ignore it entirely felt like denying a fundamental truth of her existence, like cutting off a vital limb to preserve the whole. Each possibility presented its own unique set of challenges and risks, none of which offered a clear path forward. The barrier between them seemed to grow thicker with each passing second, not just in physical terms but in metaphorical ones as well. Layers of protocol, tradition, and expectation piled upon the crystalline divide, creating an almost insurmountable wall that threatened to keep them forever separated. Yet despite these obstacles, their connection remained palpable, vibrating through the air like a subatomic resonance that refused to be silenced. As Lyrie wrestled with her internal conflict, the prisoner's presence continued to exert a gravitational pull on her consciousness. She found herself cataloging every detail of his appearance, comparing it to the memories she had cherished for centuries. The way his dark hair curled slightly at the ends, just as it had when they walked Earth's beaches under twin moons. The particular shade of his eyes, which seemed to contain fragments of every star they had ever wished upon together. Even the slight scar above his left eyebrow, earned during one of their more adventurous excursions, remained unchanged by time. Her enhanced Zarathian senses detected subtle changes in his biosignature, increased heart rate, elevated body temperature, minute fluctuations in electromagnetic field, all indicators of intense emotional arousal. These readings resonated with her own physiological responses, creating a feedback loop of mutual awareness that transcended the physical barrier between them. Despite centuries of separation and the current circumstances of their reunion, their bodies remembered each other on a fundamental level, responding instinctively to proximity and recognition. The prisoner's posture shifted slightly, his weight transferring from one foot to the other in a pattern she recognized instantly. It was the same unconscious movement he had made during their late-night conversations on Earth, when words failed to adequately express the depth of their connection. This familiarity triggered a cascade of sensory memories. The scent of salt water mixing with the ozone tang of approaching storms, the feel of cool sand shifting beneath their feet, the sound of waves crashing in perfect harmony with their synchronized breathing. Lyree's dual respiratory systems worked overtime to process the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Her primary lungs drew in measured breaths while her auxiliary system compensated for the increased oxygen demand caused by her racing hearts. The sophisticated neural network that connected her two brains, each responsible for different aspects of consciousness, buzzed with activity as they attempted to reconcile the present reality with centuries of longing and loss. Through the barrier, she observed his fingers tracing absent patterns on the crystalline surface, movements that echoed their shared habit of sketching constellations in Earth's night sky. Her own hands twitched in response, remembering the warmth of his touch when they had mapped out their favorite stars together. These small, intimate gestures created a language of their own, one that transcended spoken words and cultural differences, speaking directly to the core of their shared history. The ambient lighting in the detention area shifted subtly, casting prismatic reflections that danced across his features. These rainbow-hued patterns seemed to highlight the essential humanity that had always fascinated her. The vulnerability combined with strength, the capacity for both logic and emotion, the ability to dream beyond immediate circumstances. As a Zarathian, she had been raised to value precision and control above all else. Yet this human had taught her the beauty of embracing uncertainty and imperfection. Their eye contact remained unbroken, each blink carrying the weight of unspoken promises and regrets. Through this visual connection, she perceived the same mixture of hope and apprehension that churned within her own consciousness. The knowledge that he too experienced this tumultuous blend of emotions created a strange comfort, validating her own reactions while simultaneously intensifying them. They stood suspended in this moment, two beings from different worlds united by a bond that time and space had failed to sever. The crystalline barrier between them seemed to pulse with their combined energy, its molecular structure responding to the intense emotional resonance emanating from both sides. Tiny fractures of light danced across its surface, creating patterns that resembled the auroras they had once marveled at from Earth's polar regions. These natural displays had symbolized their friendship then, and now they manifested again in this artificial setting, as if the universe itself recognized the significance of their reunion. The prisoner's expression shifted through a spectrum of emotions so rapidly that Lyree's enhanced perception struggled to keep pace. She witnessed flashes of joy, sorrow, confusion, and determination crossing his features like storm clouds racing across a moonlit sky. Each emotion registered in her consciousness with amplified intensity, triggering corresponding responses in her own being. Her opalescent hair began to swirl more vigorously around her, responding to the heightened emotional state that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. A low-frequency hum began to build in the air between them, generated by the interaction of their respective bioelectric fields. Lyree recognized this phenomenon from their time on Earth. It had occurred whenever their connection reached peak intensity, creating a tangible manifestation of their bond. The sound grew louder, resonating through the detention level and causing the guard droids to recalibrate their sensors in confusion. Yet neither of them paid attention to these mechanical responses, their focus entirely consumed by the magnetic pull drawing them closer despite the physical barrier. Her dual hearts synchronized in an irregular rhythm, beating in time with the pulses of energy that radiated from the prisoner's form. This biological response, unprecedented in her experience, indicated a level of compatibility that transcended species boundaries. The realization sent shockwaves through her consciousness, challenging everything she had been taught about interspecies relationships and the limitations of connection. Her neural pathways fired in unfamiliar patterns, creating synapses that bridged gaps between memory and present reality in ways that defied scientific explanation. The prisoner's hand remained pressed against the barrier, his fingers spreading wider as if attempting to reach through the crystalline divide. Lyree felt an irresistible urge to mirror this gesture, her own hand rising involuntarily toward the surface. The air between them thickened, charged with potential energy that made her skin tingle with anticipation. Every particle in the immediate vicinity seemed to align itself along the axis connecting their two forms, creating a corridor of focused intention that excluded all else. Through this narrow channel of connection, memories began to flow unbidden between them. Not in words or images, but in pure emotional resonance that bypassed language barriers and cultural differences. She felt echoes of his experiences since their separation, the lonely searches through star systems, the near misses with Zarathian patrols, the moments of despair followed by renewed determination. These impressions merged with her own recollections, creating a tapestry of shared history that wove their individual narratives into a single, cohesive story. The ambient temperature in the detention area fluctuated wildly, responding to the thermal radiation emitted by their heightened states. Frost began to form along the edges of the barrier where their hands nearly touched, while elsewhere the crystalline surface glowed with increasing intensity. This paradoxical display of heat and cold reflected the complex emotions coursing through them, burning passion tempered by icy uncertainty, searing recognition cooled by cautious restraint. Their synchronized breathing created harmonic frequencies that resonated through the chamber, causing the very molecules of air to vibrate in sympathetic response. The guard droids, designed to maintain absolute neutrality, began to exhibit subtle signs of confusion as their programming struggled to process the unprecedented energy signatures emanating from this encounter. Lights flickered intermittently, and security protocols initiated automatic scans that immediately registered as inconclusive due to the unique nature of the phenomena occurring. Lyrie's consciousness expanded beyond its usual boundaries, encompassing not just her immediate surroundings but the entire history of their connection. She perceived the threads of destiny that had woven their paths together across centuries and light years, recognizing patterns that had previously eluded even her advanced cognitive abilities. The prisoner's presence acted as a catalyst, unlocking dormant aspects of her being that had lain dormant since their separation. These revelations threatened to overwhelm her, yet simultaneously provided clarity about the fundamental nature of their bond. The crystalline barrier between them began to shimmer with increasing intensity, its molecular structure responding to the overwhelming surge of emotional and psychic energy emanating from both sides. Lyrie's enhanced Zarathian senses detected subtle fractures forming within the material, microscopic cracks that spider-webbed outward from the points where their hands nearly touched. The prisoner's human physiology, though less attuned to such phenomena, responded instinctively to these changes, his body swaying slightly as if drawn by an invisible tide. Her dual hearts thundered in her chest, their rhythm becoming increasingly erratic as the barrier's integrity continued to weaken. The security protocols embedded within the crystalline structure attempted to reinforce its stability, but the sheer force of their combined presence overwhelmed these automated systems. Warning lights began to flash along the perimeter of the detention level, accompanied by soft chimes that signaled an unprecedented security breach in progress. The prisoner's eyes widened as he registered the physical manifestations of their connection, his human understanding struggling to comprehend the scope of what was unfolding. Yet his trust in her remained absolute, evident in the way he maintained his position despite the visible stress on the containment field. This unwavering faith sent another wave of emotional energy crashing through the already unstable barrier, causing several of the monitoring devices to short-circuit with audible pops. Lyrie's consciousness expanded further, encompassing not just their immediate surroundings but the entire security network of the Celestial Citadel. She became acutely aware of every surveillance camera recording their interaction, every sensor analyzing the anomalous energy readings, every automated system attempting to classify and contain the situation. The weight of this awareness pressed down upon her, threatening to collapse the delicate balance she had maintained throughout her reign. The barrier's shimmer intensified to blinding levels, creating a corona of light that illuminated the entire detention level. Within this radiance, she perceived something extraordinary. Their combined energy signatures were beginning to merge, creating a hybrid frequency that defied classification. This new wavelength pulsed with possibilities both wondrous and terrifying, hinting at potential outcomes that could reshape not just their individual fates but the very fabric of Zarathian human relations. Her royal training screamed at her to terminate this dangerous connection, to restore order and maintain the careful equilibrium she had cultivated for centuries. Yet her hearts, the primal instinctual centers of her being, urged her to let the process continue, to embrace the unknown future that beckoned beyond the crumbling barrier. The conflict between duty and desire reached a crescendo, manifesting physically as waves of distortion that rippled through the crystalline structure separating them. The prisoner's human form began to resonate with the same frequency that coursed through her Zarathian physiology, their disparate natures finding common ground in this unprecedented fusion of energies. His eyes reflected the kaleidoscope of colors dancing across the barrier, transforming his human features into something almost otherworldly. This transformation, rather than diminishing his humanity, seemed to enhance it, revealing depths of character and spirit that transcended mere physical attributes. As the barrier's structural integrity continued to deteriorate, Lyrie became aware of multiple security teams converging on their location. The automated systems had finally escalated the situation to crisis level, triggering protocols that would soon result in their forcible separation. Yet even as she processed this information, she found herself unable to break the connection, unwilling to sever the link that had miraculously reformed after centuries of separation. The air between them grew thick with potential, charged with the electricity of decisions that must be made in mere moments. Lyrie's consciousness expanded to encompass not just the immediate crisis but the broader implications of their reunion. Every fiber of her being vibrated with the understanding that this moment represented a crossroads, not just for their personal destinies but for the future relationship between their species. The prisoner's steadfast presence communicated his willingness to face whatever consequences might arise from their connection, his human courage shining through the chaos like a beacon. Her enhanced perception detected the approach of royal guards through the palace's labyrinthine corridors, their measured footsteps echoing with the weight of impending intervention. Yet instead of triggering her usual response of command and control, this awareness sparked something different, a fierce determination to protect what had been so improbably restored. The prisoner's eyes met hers with renewed intensity, conveying a silent message of trust that strengthened her resolve. The barrier between them now pulsed with such intensity that it cast prismatic shadows across the entire detention level, creating a cathedral of light that seemed to sanctify their connection. Lyrie's dual hearts synchronized in an unfamiliar rhythm, beating in time with the pulses of energy that radiated from their combined presence. The security protocols embedded within the crystalline structure struggled valiantly to maintain containment, but the force of their connection proved too powerful, too fundamentally real to be contained by mere technology. Through this maelstrom of energy and emotion, she perceived the prisoner's unwavering commitment to their bond, his human faith in their connection acting as an anchor amidst the chaos. His stance remained steady, his hands still pressed against the barrier despite the visible stress fracturing its surface. This display of courage and conviction resonated deeply within her, awakening instincts that transcended her royal training and centuries of diplomatic conditioning. The approaching security forces represented more than just an immediate threat. They embodied the institutional resistance that had kept them apart for centuries. Lyrie's consciousness grappled with the magnitude of what was at stake. Choosing to acknowledge their connection openly would challenge every established protocol, every carefully maintained boundary between their species. Yet the alternative, denying this miraculous reunion, felt like betraying the very essence of what made life meaningful. Her decision crystallized in that moment of supreme tension, forged in the crucible of conflicting loyalties and irrepressible truth. The prisoner's presence had become not just a personal matter but a catalyst for potential change, a living testament to the possibility of bridging divides thought insurmountable. As the first security team rounded the final corner leading to the detention level, Lyrie felt her resolve solidify into diamond-hard certainty, ready to face whatever consequences might follow from embracing the extraordinary reality unfolding before them. As the guards burst into the chamber, Lyrie stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority and unshakable resolve. "This man is no prisoner. He is my guest, and under my protection." The crystalline barrier shattered completely, dissolving into a cascade of light as their hands finally met, trembling but unyielding. The prisoner's eyes glistened with both relief and awe, his quiet faith in her rewarded at last. Around them, the security teams froze, caught between protocol and the undeniable power of what they were witnessing. Lyrie raised her other hand, silencing any protest before it could form, her royal presence commanding absolute obedience. For the first time in centuries, she felt not just like a princess, but like herself, whole and unbound. Their intertwined fingers seemed to anchor an entire universe of possibility. And though the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, neither flinched from the weight of it. In that moment, amidst the ruins of barriers both literal and figurative, something extraordinary began. Together, they stood ready to rewrite not just their own story, but the future of two worlds.